Very good evening, teachers. Thank you so much for joining the EI webinar on this Saturday. We couldn't be more grateful. We'll wait for a minute or so and we'll let everybody join. Um, Till people join, I could maybe set up some of the rules. So you can use the Q&A to post any questions. We will also have a few engagement activities. You will get the QR code and you can scan the QR code and answer the questions. And finally, we also have a feedback form. We love for you to tell us how we can do better. What are some of the things you liked and what are your key takeaways? So with that, yeah, I can see more people joining. Just a few more seconds and we'll jump straight into it. For people who've joined, my name is Shivangi. I am a product manager and I work on MindSpark English, which is EI's offering, and it's a language learning product, English language learning product. And today we'll be talking about a very interesting topic, something that excites all of us, which is how we can design games to build language thinking, to make sure that our students have conceptual clarity, and how, as a teacher, you don't have to wait for an external requirement or a lot of setup to gamify your classrooms, right? So we'll go into some of those intricacies and nuances over the course of next 45 to 50 minutes, and we can take Q&A after that. All right. More people joining. Let's just begin in less than a minute. All right. The numbers are growing. Okay, perfect. Let's get started. So I'll quickly set up the agenda for today. So today we go into how language learning happens, and you would resonate with some of the conceptual aspects of how learning takes place. And then we'll segue into how games use the same concepts to build conceptual clarity, right? Which means if a game is well designed, if it takes into account both pedagogical principles and the game design principles, then it can do wonders for our students, right? We will distinguish between games that are premised on motivation versus games that could be distracting, right? Because as a teacher, as a parent, even as educators, we all want to maximize the benefits without, making it a point that games, could lead to only distraction. So that's another thing. We'll also go into strategies to implement effective game-based learning. So I have prepared a case study from MindSpark English. We can go into detail. And we also finally will see how these strategies can not only help you in your classrooms, but also outside of it. I'll quickly check the Q&A. Okay, perfect. So would it be okay? I know this is not a two-way street. I'll come back to all the questions. I'll answer them live, and we can then take on the discussion in the interest of time. All right. So that's the agenda. So we'll come to fundamentals of language learning, right? For any learning to take place, more so for language learning to take place, we identify three pillars that are supremely important, right? And they take any passive learner to an active learner. So the first is active engagement, which means that when a child engages with a piece of text, a story, a grammar question, a vocabulary question, a writing piece, that is where their interest levels are the highest, right? Which means more retention, more questions, and more grasp of the concept, right? So the first very important pillar is active engagement. Now, cognitive science also tells us that knowledge retrieval is the second most important, aspect of optimized learning, which means that if a child is able to understand the concept and then retrieve it as and when they need and retrieve it in terms of the correct context, then our job as educators is, more or less done. And the third most important pillar is constructive feedback. which means that it's very important for us educators to provide the right kind of feedback at the right place for our learners to get better and to, sort of master a concept, right? Now, today's agenda is in the, purview of language learning and how we could design simple to complex games to make sure that each concept does these three things, right? So our game similarly has to actively engage students. They have to be a platform where active knowledge retrieval takes place. And the games have to make sure that constructive and timely feedback goes to our students. I have a quick little exercise after this. Um, you can scan this QR, but I wanted to know from the audience which word or words come to your mind when you think of the word game. Uh, we have about 40 seconds. I'll also, share the responses that are coming in. Perfect. I can see four people join. Which words come to your mind when you think of the word game or any game? Could we have some answers? I see four people have joined. You could think of a game from your past. You could think of games, in terms of their traditional understanding. You can also think of games, in terms of how playfulness. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I think you can also think of games um, as they have become today. That's also, an even more important and interesting aspect of how we have started to view games. Uh, Thank you so much for the participant who's added playfulness. Could we, okay, fun learning energy. Thank you so much. Um, do we have more responses for a nice word? So you can scan this QR code, and I would like to know which words come to your mind when you think of a game. Uh, Maybe a couple more seconds. I also have words on chat. Uh, I have Scrabble. I have enjoy. Okay. All right. Right. So some of the definitions of games as we know, today, uh, are around the fact that play is extremely important, right? All our policies, our frameworks are also emphasizing and re-emphasizing on the fact that play constitutes to be and should be one of the most integral part of a child's development, right? Um, and even Albert Einstein said that play is the highest form of research, which means that when children are playing either digitally or offline in their parks, in their ground, in your classrooms, in your language labs, that is where maximum learning happens, right? So the idea of creating conceptual games or well-designed games connects to this idea of playfulness, of enjoyment, and of learning with full understanding. Right. So how do well-designed games actually support learning? So they focus attention through clear goals, which means I have a very clear checklist of what is it that I need to do in this game. They strengthen understanding through retrieval and decision making, right? So go back to the tenets that we spoke about a while back, where we said that active engagement is a primary tenet, knowledge retrieval is another tenet, and finally, improve learning through immediate, meaningful feedback. So the tenets that support language learning, when coupled with a well-designed game, can do wonders for your classroom and for your students. But not all games support learning, right? So it is also important for us to distinguish between speed-based engagement and thinking-based engagement, right? Now, what this means is games become distracting when they reward speed rather than reasoning, right? So when students are in a hurry to win or answer quickly, when there are too many clicks, when there are too many rewards, it is a form of distraction, and that is something we must avoid when creating a good game, right? Games that include excessive animations, timers, or any sort of overstimulation to a user or a player are also not doing their job, right? So I would say these games are important and they may engage students, but they do not provide a space for knowledge retrieval, and they may or may not have active feedback. And finally, in such cases, students may appear engaged, which means active engagement is still true, but the rest of the two things in the triangle that we spoke about do not take place, right? So you may think learning is taking place, but it's actually disguised learning or superficial learning. Now, if you attended EI webinars or if you're connected to us in any form, as a partner, as someone who has used EI Asset or EI MySpark, you would know that a good game is like a good question, right? And EI has been doing some work on spreading knowledge on what constitutes a good question. And you'll be surprised to see that the key principles of creating a good question directly apply to creating a good game, right? We'll go detailed in the course of this webinar also. But to begin with, a well-designed game rewards reasoning, right? Which means we design a game to understand, to value how a student arrives at the answer. In that case, the answer becomes less important, but the path that the child has taken or multiple children have taken is extremely important. It's almost like a scientific experiment where you want to see where has the child clicked, what is the error that the child is making, how much have they taken to arrive at the particular answer, and what is their individual unique path to learning. A well-designed game also focuses on thinking and meaning making. Uh, it requires students to pause, to compare options, and to make deliberate choices. So we are not in a rush. We don't want to reward speed. We want to reward accuracy. We want to reward effort, right? A well-designed game also makes student thinking visible. And the fourth point is most important, which is it allows teachers to see misconception and respond to them, right? So, like I said, your game, very much like a good question, is your playground to see how well students have understood the concept and what are some of their misconceptions and how can you remediate. In fact, games are also a fantastic source of remediation. They offer you insight like nobody else, and it gives a unique turn to your pedagogy. In fact, we recently had the epic conference, and one of the winning papers talked about a flipped classroom, where the teacher took a passive learner to an actively engaged learner. And she also plugged in knowledge retrieval. She also plugged in feedback, right? Please feel free to visit our website and, you can read more about the paper. But the most interesting thing for me was how the role of the teacher today is also a science, like a scientist, basically. So you run your little experiment where you do different things in your classroom. And over the course of the next few slides, we'll see how you can create your own game. What are some of the things that you should have in your checklist, and how can you translate a passive learner into an active learner? All right, so the goal of a learning game is not a score. It's not to win or climb up the leaderboard. It is conceptual understanding, which we all believe, as educators, as people at EI, as teachers, as principals, as stakeholders, right? And it's an important thing that we must move forward. These are a few examples of the games. I'll, give a few seconds for you to maybe recall if you know some of these. I would like to see, some words on the Q&A. Do you recognize any of the game here? These are some good examples of games that, do all the three things, right? And they build conceptual understanding. So I have my eye on Q&A. Maybe 30 seconds on if you recognize any of these. Okay, I see spelling bee on the in the Q&A. Uh, word search. Okay, spelling bee again. Thank you. Wordle. Yes, crossword. Fantastic. Uh, there's also one game from Mindspark English. Uh, yeah, it's some quick crossword. Okay. Yeah, maybe one more answer we would take from the audience. Okay, I have one more crossword. Yes, perfect. So for all of you who, know these games or have seen these in your Sunday newspapers online, these are some of the games that are not in a rush. They also build long-term engagement, which means people, young or adult, want to come back and do some of these, right? And the idea is that when we design a game, it has to be scalable, it has to be sustainable, and it has to have all the things that we spoke about in the previous few slides. I have a few more in Q&A, and I'm quite tempted to read them also out loud. Yeah, I have Wordle and I have absolutely, ma'am. Crossword is a bit complicated. I mean, my idea was to, give you a few examples on how some of these games that have been going on for so long are highly sustainable and are highly engaging and are also good examples of learning games. Now let's talk about the immediate, classrooms, right? As an educator, as a teacher, what can you do to create your own game, right? So over the course of the next 15-20 minutes, I will talk about two buckets or two categories of key principles. We'll talk about pedagogical principles and we'll talk about game design principles. We'll explain and go over all of these in briefly. And then I also have a case study that translates all the principles to an actual game that we, designed in-house. All right. So designing effective learning games, and I call them two complementary lenses, right? Which means that you have to combine pedagogical strategies, which means what must be taught, as well as design principles, which means how do your students experience your game, and that is of paramount importance. Right. And feel free to take a screenshot of it, or, make notes of it because we will be using some of these to look at the actual case study that, we have prepared for you. Now, the first thing that you can do as an educator is to define a precise learning objective, right? It could be something related to reading comprehension, listening comprehension. It could be grammar, it could be vocab. Now, within these topics or within these skills, you can also pick sub skills, right? So, do you want to do a topic on or a game on inference, or how do characters talk to each other? It's supremely important that before you start to design your game, you identify the specific language skill or concept, right? What is it that you want your students to know by the end of your game, right? The second thing, which is supremely important for educators, is to identify common student misconceptions, right? Now, for example, off the top of my head, articles. Now, the usage of, a and the, specifically a and whether to use a definite article or indefinite article, is often, implemented in classrooms by looking at the consonant or the vowel, right? But a common misconception we've found in EI Asset and MindSpark is that students struggle to understand that it's not actually the letter, but the sound that determines the placement of a definite article or an indefinite article, right? So, for example, we will say an MBA, right? Because MBA has an A sound, which is a vocalic sound. It's not a consonantal sound, which means that, if I say fill in the blank with the correct article and my child writes a MBA, that is incorrect, right? So, it's very important for you to understand the pool of common student misconceptions for you to capitalize on them and almost plug them as good distractors in your game, right? This is again very similar to the qualities of a good question, right? So anticipate typical errors and partial understandings students bring to the task. Now, the third related point is that we must design for conceptual understanding and not just recall, right? So we don't want to locate and find, we don't want obvious answers. We have to make sure that in pursuing engagement or fun, conceptual clarity should not take a backseat, right? So we have to ensure that all tasks require different cognitive levels, right? It could be recall, it could be analysis, it could be justify, it could be application, so on and so forth, right? We have to sequence cognitive demand deliberately, right? Which means our games should have levels. Our games should be tailored according to the different learning levels of your classroom. Um, and finally, we have to plan to transfer beyond the game, which means that as a user or as a student, when I step out from the universe of the game, I have enough context to use it in my real life, right? This is again a very important part of, conceptual learning, of a good question and of a good game. I'll give maybe 2, 3 seconds pause in case any of you would like a screenshot of this. This will again come back when I show the application, but yeah, feel free to take a screen grab. All right. Okay. So we covered pedagogical strategies. Let's look at some of the game design principles, right? Or game design strategies. Now, this part tells you how learning is experienced, right? So as an educator, once you've identified your pedagogical needs in a game, we must also look at some of the best principles of game design, right? So the first one is create meaningful decision points. Now, what this means is that when as a user, I try to make a move or I decide or I choose an option or I start giving an answer, I should take a pause and I should reflect, right? So we must give that space to the child. We have to we have to use constraints to bring attention, which means um, we don't have to overstimulate the user, right? So too many rewards, or if you're doing a digital game, too many clicks, too many badges clearly distract a user, right? The third is build productive struggle. Now this again comes from a research paper where sometimes we think that a child is struggling with a concept, and so we must make it easy for them, or we may give them a fair bit of scaffolding, but it is in the right kind of struggle that the brain gets activated and different parts of the brain that engage learning get activated, right? So initial certainty should be well prompted and we should let the user figure it out, right? That's very, very important for any game, whether digital, whether offline, whether you do it in your classrooms and so on. We have to make thinking visible, right? Which means that the game should tell you why a learner chose an option. Now, if any of you has used the MindSpark English, either a math platform or an English platform or an AIDT platform, we make it a point to show why a learner chose what they chose, right? So if I choose a correct answer, I get an explanation. If I choose an incorrect answer or incorrect option, I get an explanation, right? It's very important for us to, through repetition and through the right kind of feedback, tell the learner that, hey, you chose this because of this rationale. How about look out for it, or you make sure that this doesn't happen in the future. So it's important for us to track and make thinking supremely visible. And the final tenet is that you design feedback to explain, not just score, right? Which means that our feedback should reveal reasoning patterns. So if we create a game on, let's say, articles, then we have to scaffold them rightly. If there is a question on, identifying common nouns or proper nouns or abstract nouns, then the incorrect choices that the students make must be complemented by the right kind of feedback from the teachers or educators. Right. As usual, if you want to take a screen grab or a screenshot of this, now is a good time to do that. And in the next set of slides, we will look at an actual game that we implemented at EI in Mindspark English, which uses these strategies, to sort of create a game, right? Because I believe this was partly theoretical. All right. I'll quickly check the Q&A section also. Okay, there's nothing new. Fantastic. Right. Um, so this is the game that we created on order of adjectives, right? Um, a big red brick, a red big brick, right? One sounds right, one sounds incorrect. Why does it sound correct or incorrect? Why does it feel intuitive? Um, is something that we will take on in the next section. But before that, I have another exercise, right? So we'll go back to our Mentimeter again, and you can again scan this. But for language teachers, my question is, how do you generally teach order of adjectives in your classrooms? I can see 6 people have joined. Eight, yes. So we'll spend a little bit of time to see some of the strategies, some of the ways in which you teach order of adjectives. You can also add some of the difficulties you face in, teaching this grammatical concept. Um, I'll wait for a few answers on the screen. Wonderful. The question is, how do we generally teach order of adjectives in classrooms? If there are certain ways, certain strategies, that you use in your classroom, then now's a good time to post about them. For new people who've joined the chat, you can scan this QR code and attempt this question. Start with meaning. Okay. Yes. I'm assuming meaning of the order of adjectives, the order actually. Um, I think this is maybe a junk answer. Uh, yeah, we'll wait for maybe 30, 40 more seconds. Yeah, for language teachers, how do you generally teach order of adjectives in your classroom? More people are joining in. If we could also have responses from them. All right, maybe 10 more seconds. Contrastive drills. Okay. Hmm. Okay, great. Uh, so I'll go back to the question. Right. So typically in classrooms, when order of adjectives is taken, and this came up in some of the asset questions and interviews that we did, both with students and teachers. The users often said that there's an order to it, and we either memorize the order of it or it gets intuitive. In fact, even from my classroom experience as a student, I would look at an order and I would intuitively think it's right or wrong. But it's often difficult for students to tell us why a certain order has to be followed, right? So that was our pain point, that how do we create questions and how do we create a game on order of adjectives, right? So the learning problem was that it's often taught as a rigid formula, or it's often rule based, right? Which means that it's an unchanging sequence that has to be followed. And it's quite difficult for both educators and, users to sort of grasp and understand. Now, of course, there is an emphasis on memorization, and the why gets lost in this process. It's also difficult to apply in context, which means students struggle to apply in real world writing or speaking, right? And finally, the focus often that came up in our interviews also, is to stay on the correct order and not primarily on the reasoning behind it. So when we did a few pilots before we had to launch the game, we would quiz students on telling us why a certain option is incorrect. And in most cases, they would tell us, well, this is how it is. And, I don't know how to, make you understand why I chose something. In fact, these were, interesting experiments that we did in various geographies across the country. Right. So let's apply the techniques to create our own game, right? So over the next course of few slides, I will walk you through each pedagogical or game design strategy that we spoke about in the earlier sections to be able to create the game that we spoke, right? So define a precise learning objective, right? So what we did was we went back to the good old books. We looked at research papers, and one paper that we found was by Enrica Rosato, and she's from Department of Philosophy, CMU, which is Carnegie Mellon University. And she is a native speaker, but she was also extremely interested in the why behind order of adjectives, right? So, in fact, she writes in her paper that, most of the people she interviewed had similar concerns where things would feel intuitive. And I wouldn't go, into a lot more details about the paper, but not only does she study the order, she also comes up with, minor changes to the adjective order, right? We also identified common student misconceptions, right? So we swapped a few words in our pilots, and then we saw how students were responding to it. Right. Now, we had to design for conceptual understanding and not recall, right? So I've taken this from British Council, but essentially, this is the order, right? General opinion, specific opinion, size, shape, age, color, nationality, material, and then a noun, right? So this is generally the order of adjectives that we follow before a noun, right? But research shows that adjective order actually follows semantic patterns. And the reason it feels intuitive to us is what was broken down in this paper. And we had to understand it to design our game, right? Now, you can pick any concept, you can study it a little bit, and you can see what is it that you want the students to learn through your game. And it does not have to be a complex game. It does not have to be digital. It could be a simple classroom game with different cards or with, everyday objects, given you take into account some of these checklist principles. Right. Following up with design for conceptual understanding. So if you see here, the most efficient combination is big red brick, right? Which is closer to the house. But if I say big brick red house, then that makes little sense, right? So in the paper, what the author did was she tried shuffling some of these to be able to come up with why the brain thinks it's easy. Then the paper talks about three spheres, right? So, which ties beautifully with sequence cognitive demand deliberately, right? So, we looked at things closest to a noun and we leveled our game accordingly, right? So, level one would have two adjectives, level two would have three adjectives, level four would we add on more adjectives, right? Till it becomes intuitive to the child. And every time the child chose an incorrect option, you would tell them why this is incorrect, right? So pedagogically, this made a lot of sense. And this actually told us on why do we choose the right order as it is. And finally, we had to design for conceptual clarity, not understanding, right? So look at these sentences from the paper, right? When someone says my new old car, it means my car is old, but I have recently bought it, right? Whereas if you say my old new car, then it flips the meaning. Then it means I had a car which was once new and now I do not, right? Similarly, if you say a young old man versus old young man, the meanings are flipped. And the third example that the author gives is, a big small dog, right, versus a small big dog. And you notice how meaning is, switched. So we want students to understand some of these nuances and to be able to summarize, reproduce, and comprehend some of these. Right. So these are pedagogical techniques, for any given concept, for any learning outcome. You as educators can, identify the learning outcomes, uh, look at the misconceptions given to that, concept in your classrooms. How do you design so that feedback comes to the students at the right time? How do you make sure that there is enough scaffolding, but you don't make it super easy? And finally, how do you make sure that there is conceptual understanding, not just, recall well? Right. Now these are some of the, grabs from our game. And now we will come to the design related principles that we spoke about, right? So the first rule is that we have to create meaningful decision points, right? So what we did was we tried to, give it a Greek flavor. So we said, this is an Olympus quest, and we had short bios of all the Greek gods, and a symbol or an artifact that they have to have, right? So if you see, there are only two rewards, boons and stars. The child can choose the difficulty level here, whether it's easy, whether it's medium. And there's a little tooltip here that also explains, right? This is a digital game. I will give you more examples design games on the go, right? So the artifact here was Zeus's lightning bolt, right? So the first thing that we had to do was we had to make sure that we plug in meaningful choices, right? Now, the second thing was use constraints to bring attention, right? So remember I talked about having two adjectives followed by three adjectives followed by four adjectives, right? So if you see the level is easy here, and it says arrange these two adjectives to begin describing the lightning bolt, right? Enormous golden. And there's a little hint section, right? So it is meaningful scaffolding without giving it all away, right? Then the third step is to build productive struggle into gameplay, right? So from my previous two order adjective to now I have six orders in place, right? So I'm saying now add one more adjective to your description, placing them in the correct order, right? Which means that I'm gradually increasing the complexity as patterns become clear, right? Which is more important. Again, if you have a classroom game, you can divide children into smaller groups, you can have cards, you can have cups, you can have everyday artifacts, and you can gradually increase the complexity of your game, right? We have to make thinking visible, right? So here the children had to pick six objectives, right, for the artifacts. And while all of these are adjectives, we have to pick adjectives that describe the artifact, right? So there is a nuanced understanding of you don't pick all the adjectives that you see here, right? So there are near correct options that are designed to surface misconceptions. And finally, we have to put in a hint, right? Now here, what do I say? Remember, size comes before color when describing objects. Think about which quality would you notice from a distance, right? So go back to the three spheres that we had. And when onboarding the students onto this game, we teach. And when students start using this game, they are gradually, made familiar to some of these objects, right? So it's no longer about cramming or, rote memorizing a particular order. It's also about actively applying, making mistakes to be able to know why a certain order is incorrect or why a certain order is correct, so to say. Right. Moving on. So more ideas, like I promised, So I would say as educators, whether you want to do a reading game, a listening game, a grammar game, a vocabulary game, right? These are different ideas that you can do, digitally or in your classrooms, right? So for reading, we can have character conversations. There could be cards of story sequencing. We could have guess the character. You can pair two students and it could be a passage check, right? For listening, we could have follow the reader, match the sound, a whisper challenge, a sound sorting, right? Uh, um, have a very clear learning objective and they can be designed so that you land your whatever you want to teach and sort of drive the point home. For grammar and vocabulary, I think these two topics lend themselves the best to any kind of game, right? So you can have a detective game, you can have verb charades, a preposition game, and for vocabulary, again, you could mix cards, you could have jars, you could have journals to be able to create your own game, right? So an active, learning objective for me through this webinar was to also, share with you on how the basic change in when we teach in our classrooms. And a pedagogical shift in approach to gamify our classrooms would go a long way, right? So a game is not just something that is high stakes, that is digital, that is, flashy, that has a lot of rewards, but something simple that you can do in your classrooms, and you would see how the pre-post of that concept would, have magical results. I'll pause for a bit in case any of you would like a screen grab for this. And let me also check the Q&A section. Perfect. I see more people have joined in. Thank you so much. So I'll do a recap, right? So we started from, what are some of the principles of learning. We went through how the same principles can be applied to a good game. We talked about the strategies to create a well-designed game. We talked about the pedagogical strategies. We talked about game design strategies. And we also saw how all of them sort of came in beautifully in the example that I gave on order of adjectives, right? And these are some of the more ideas that you can explore, for your young learners, for people in middle grades, for your learners in higher grades. All right. So I wanted to talk in the rest of the 7 to 8 minutes, talk about learning games in EI MindSpark English, right? So MindSpark English is the language learning tool. It's from class 1 to 10. And one of the most important things that we work on is on games that are rooted in strong pedagogy, right? So these are two screenshots from the game that we recently developed. The first one is called Rhyme Time, which means a child has to match all the rhyming words that appear, right? And if you see, our only reward mechanism is a gem, right? Which means the child has to look at each word that rhymes with graph, right? And if you see in the bottom, there is a gentle nudge that says, keep searching, there might be more rhyming friends out there, right? Now, this game is something that was created purely out of student interviews, right? So more and more students told us that they would want a game on zombies. And let me know in Q&A in case your classrooms also have an increase in students wanting to read or know more about supernatural elements. So we ran a survey, and most of our learners chose the game on zombie, right? So this game is on anagrams, which means, jumbled letters to form meaningful words. And even here we have, negative marking, positive marking, and that's about it, right? And if you answer incorrectly, the zombie person sort of goes deep and deep. And if you answer correctly, he, sort of comes back. The idea again is that in the front, this is a game for learners. But for educators, for researchers, for game designers, there is a strong pedagogical concept that you wish your students are mastering. We have more games. So this is again a snap from our MindSpark English interface. So we have articulate, we have conjugal climbs, which of course is on conjunctions. In fact, we have an advanced, version of story builder. We have games on adverbs, anagrams, prepositions, nouns, rhyme time, modal verbs, and so on, right? So these are all grammar, vocabulary topics that everybody struggles with in terms of, building conceptual clarity. And these games are leveled, which means that, a child can start with the level that is appropriate to them, and they can gradually increase. Um, some of you may be familiar with Story Builder, right? So we wanted to gamify writing, and we wanted to make sure, how could we gamify using AI storytelling, or the idea of story building. And if you see, a child has to choose the character, they have to choose the strength, they have to choose the weakness, and they have to do multiple combinations. And educators, we would know that this is all they need when they build a story. So, what do we teach? We teach that games have to have in this case, stories need to have a setting. We need to have characters. Our characters should be well rounded. There is a setting where a story takes place. Our characters have names. The story has a beginning, a middle, and a logical end. And there are different kinds of endings, right? So I could have a happy ending, I could have a surprising ending, I could have a thrilling ending, right? So on and so forth. But the beauty of Story Builder is, and we also call it as an IKEA effect, is when I take multiple components and build a story, I want to read it, right? So games also can be interdisciplinary, which means that you can design a game that, strengthens vocabulary, but also reading, right? Um, then we have writing, which again we wanted to templatize. And if you see here, we again have correct feedback, right? So this is still something that we're testing and actively piloting. But essentially, we wanted to teach, poetry writing. So we wanted to teach them how to write a limerick or a couplet or a haiku, right? And with the response of the students, we wanted to give them personalized, tailored feedback, right? This is what you have done perfectly, brilliantly, and this is something that you can do better. Watch out for it the next time, right? So it's very important for us to maintain positive reinforcement and at the same time give constructive feedback that the child will take, with them a long way. All right. So with this, we can begin the Q&A. I can either answer live or I can quickly, type on chat. I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll be more than happy to, take in questions in the chat. If you have any questions for me, please feel free to put it in the Q&A column. And for those of you who have joined, we would love if you could scan this QR code and give us the feedback for this session and the upcoming sessions. While you do this, I will display it and I will also take in some questions. Kratika ma'am asks, uh, yeah, so have these games been made available for the students? Yes. Yes, ma'am. These are available to the students. The games that I showed as part of MindSpark English are available to students from grades 1 to 10. I hope that answers your question. Yeah. We've also put the feedback form in the chat, and there's also the QR code here. And I'm happy to take in more questions. Uh, Yeah, there is another question. So Vishal sir asks, on how can we have MindSpark English? Thank you so much, sir, for showing interest. You can write to us, and I believe you can also, visit our website or, drop in. In fact, the feedback form also has a place where you can, put in if you're interested, and someone from our team will reach out to you. So I believe that's how, yeah, you can reach out to us. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for, showing your interest. All right. So, yeah. Oh, this is interesting. So, Ashita, ma'am asks, could you suggest some active engaging games for grades 11 and 12? Right. So, ma'am, when students are at this age, they are more interested in building things, right? So, I think, some of the games that you can have if you want to do in a classroom setting is to do role plays, right? In fact, the teacher that I spoke about, who won, our recent competition, also had class 9 and 10 as subject of her class, right? So, I would say wherever students are more in control of their classroom, or their creative activity, that's a fantastic game for them, right? So, if you're teaching, let's say, a literature classroom, you can prepare students to come up with alternative endings, right? Which means that you may have, let's say, a class on Julius Caesar, and tomorrow you may request or you may ask your students to flip the ending or see what are the kinds of things they would want to change in the story, right? Now it does two things. One, it builds reading comprehension strategies, which means students have to understand what actually happened. You're also opening the way to creative expression, right? Which means that students can bring in their creativity and can turn it into a play or into a theatrical exercise. You can also use a host of digital products, that would help you sort of make some of these answers visible. And like I said, you can also do a lot of story creation, which means that students have to, imagine different scenarios. They have to imagine different, places coming in. And then you can give it an interdisciplinary flavor, right? Which means it need not be in the English context. You can also think of, for example, AI prompting. In fact, our AIDT team does a fantastic job, and you can look out for some of those webinars also, where responsible prompt engineering can also lead to a lot of gamification. So yeah, I hope I hope that helps you. Uh, I have more questions on chat. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sheila ma'am. You found this as an interesting session. I'm so glad. Uh, yeah, there's another question. Do learners with reading difficulties perform better in digital games? Um, I mean, I wouldn't have a clear answer to this because this is also, related to the kind of difficulties. But I think, I think an answer for me would be, even in our classrooms, accessibility has to be at the heart of everything that we do, right? So, yes, digital games, you know, remove the pressure of performance, and you may or may not have to be absolutely present, and there may be this sense of just being conscious, or being a little shy. But then there are active read aloud games that take place, and in fact, to remove some of these reading difficulties, those games would be a good pitch. So yes, I wouldn't have an absolute answer on whether they perform better in digital games or not. But I think irrespective of that, the identifying the LO part has to be, supremely important when you design a game for anybody, more so for people with reading difficulties. Uh, oh, my chat is flooded with questions, which is perfect. I'm just skimming through. Okay. Yeah, so Lakshmi ma'am asked, could you suggest some activities for grade 3 children, IB curriculum? Ma'am, I would go back to a slide that we had. Just one second. And in fact, these are all activities that are suggestive in nature. But I think once you identify, regardless of your curriculum, once you identify the specific learning outcome, it could be anything. It could be read alouds. It could be understanding characters. It could be how to interpret the shifts that happen in a story, right? It could also be spoken word. It could be the comfort in articulating. So I think for each of these things, reading, listening, grammar, vocab, writing, speaking, I think once the learning outcome is identified, it's super easy to create the game. And you could look at some of these ideas for the learning game. In fact, I would encourage teachers to also get creative, and look at your immediate surroundings. And if you're able to connect your game with things around you, and if it is created by using objects around you, then nothing like that, specifically for, students who are just learning to, read, write, engage, and, form their idea of learning. Um, that would be my answer. Okay, we are at 3:55. Maybe 5 more minutes. I can take in some more questions. Let me again go back to the feedback slide for any of you that has missed. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So Nisreen ma'am asks, any game ideas for active passive voice? Ma'am, dialogues or role play again, or partner games would be the best if you're looking for a classroom activity, where you can have child A talk in active voice and child B has to only respond in passive voice, right? In fact, you can also create groups of people where the rule is that if you miss speaking in the voice that has been allocated to you, then maybe you get negative points, or you can have stars in your so for every correct one you give a star, for every incorrect one you have to sort of take back the star, or the star has to be distributed, right? So you can pick. So your learning outcome is great, which is conceptual understanding of active passive voice. You have to now take into account the kind of misconceptions that students will make when converting from an active to a passive, or a passive to an active, right? And your learning cards, right, could be created in a way that they tap into some of these misconceptions. And then you add a reward mechanism to it, which could be certificates, which if you're doing it digitally, it could be, shout outs to people, or points, or gems. Um, and you could sort of create like a nice assortment of, all of these things, and, turn it into a game. All right. Uh, I have more questions. Um, there's a question on what common mistakes do educators make when designing language learning games. Pretty important question. So I think because um, the engagement has always been at the heart of game design. We mistakenly only design for engagement, right? Whereas keeping into mind the tapping of misconceptions, keeping into mind that feedback is given correctly, is also something that we as educators should be mindful of. For example, in a class one or a class two, group, you may show some cards, and you may say, pick out the fruits, right? And that could be a highly engaging exercise. But for students who picked the incorrect fruit, have we given them feedback? Have we looked at what are the kinds of misconceptions that students are creating or having live, and do we give the right kind of feedback, right? So I would again go back to the triangle that we spoke about, where we not only have to have the engagement quotient high, but we also have to make sure that our games are a site of knowledge retrieval, and that we give them the right kind of feedback at the right moment for them to reflect onto the choice that they have made, or the answer that they have given. Yeah, that would be my stance on it. Uh, there is another question in the chat, which is on, how might the, communication be recalibrated to ensure that there is dissemination of information pertaining to new features. So I would say we in the product team also send out regular emails to all the schools who are associated with us. We also do a lot of sessions, a lot of webinars. And if in particular, ma'am, feature change or any communication has not reached out to you, then you can get in touch with the academic consultant who's been associated with your school, and they can bring your feedback to us. Alternatively, you can also always write to us, and you can always use our socials to connect with us, right? So multiple sources through which you can speak to us. I think the quickest and the easiest would be if you just get in touch with any of our academic consultants mapped to your school, and I'm sure they will do a good job and a quick job of bringing back your question to us. All right. Um, Great. Thank you so much. I think uh, there are more questions. I will take some of these back with me. Some of these are wonderful compliments on, the efficacy of the session. Maybe I'll take one more before we close in the interest of time. Yeah, let me do. Yeah. Kiran ma'am asks, dear Shivangi, hands-on activities. Ma'am, I would say there is a plethora of, hands-on activities available. There are so many activities that are proven to help your students, inside the classrooms or in the digital world. And you can always make it, a part of your game design to say, I will create an activity on a grammar concept, and I will make sure that it's a DIY, kind of activity. So I would say, whether the game is performative, whether the game is something to do with reflection, whether the game is a group activity or a hands-on activity, is something that is in your hands as an educator, and you can very well capitalize on. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Uh, Thank you so much. Thank you so much, ma'am. Perfect. So one final request on, if you can fill in the feedback form. In fact, for people whose question has either not been answered, because I have a whole range of them, please fill them out in the feedback form. We will reach out to you. We will send in the answers to you, and rest assured, we will get back to you with an answer. Thank you so much. It was lovely engaging with each of you. And the fact that you made time to attend this webinar makes us supremely happy. Thank you. We shall come back with more webinars as part of EI webinars. Keep learning, and let's be all playful. Thank you so much. Thank you, one and all.